Listening, version 59561. You will hear a number of different recordings, and you will have to answer questions on what you hear. There will be time for you to read the instructions and questions, and you will have a chance to check your work. All the recordings will be played once only. The test is in 4 parts. Write all your answers in the listening question booklet. At the end of the test, you will be given 10 minutes to transfer your answers to an answer sheet. Now turn to Part 1 on page 2 of your question booklet.
Part 1. You will hear a conversation between a travel agent and a student who is planning a trip abroad. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 6. Now listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 6.
Hello, how can I help you?
I'm taking a year off and I'm hoping to travel abroad and to find work as well for part of the time. I know you specialise in student travel and work placements, so...
That's right. We can help you arrange your travel and set up a job for you. But first of all, I need some personal details, and then we'll match your details against our database to see what's available work-wise.
Great.
OK. Your full name?
Sarah Brown.
Date of birth?
March the 30th.
Oh, I'm the 31st.
1988.
And your address?
21 Waverley Road, Radstone, RD4 6WV.
And a contact telephone number, please.
I can give you my mobile number. 0903 775115.
Fine. Now, tell me where you plan to travel to, and I'll see how I can help.
Well, I'd like to go to Northern Europe.
Have you been there before?
No, I know Southern Europe quite well, as I've been there with my family. We always went by plane, but now I can choose. I'd like to go by train so I can stop off whenever I want.
OK. Now, just as important, what sort of work have you got in mind?
Well, I thought about hotel work because then I might get accommodation with the job, and I'd like to work for about half the year.
That sort of work is usually quite competitive. Perhaps you should consider an alternative just in case.
Such as?
Well, lots of students like to work on a farm, and we have lots of requests from people looking for student workers for a few weeks at a time throughout the year. You can generally earn quite good money if you're willing to work fairly long hours.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 7 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 7 to 10.
Now, travel. Buying single tickets would be expensive, so the best option would be to have a European pass, which would give you unlimited rail travel at off-peak times. To start off with, we could issue one for up to 3 months to cover the countries you're intending to visit.
Sounds good. Do you have any information about youth hostels which I could use to plan my route?
Yes, I'll give you a booklet now. But it's down to you to book your accommodation. At certain times of the year, especially during public holiday periods, such places fill up fast. And remember, if we're going to arrange work for you in the countryside, you won't be able to go out easily in the evenings, although you'd probably be too tired anyway.
I won't mind that.
And you're going to be travelling alone?
Yes.
Well, before I make any arrangements for you, you need to have insurance for your entire trip. We can arrange that for you if you like.
What does it cover?
Any valuable items, jewellery for example, your money, your mobile, your health, and if you needed to get back home quickly, you'd be covered so you could buy a plane ticket.
Right, I'll do that. I thought I'd take my laptop so I can email and keep in touch with people at home.
Not a good idea to lug your computer around with you. It's much more sensible to rely on an internet cafe. That's what we tell people to do.
Oh, OK.
Right, so I've entered all your details. Let's see what the database comes up with.
That is the end of Part 1. You now have 1 minute to check your answers to Part 1.
Part 2. You will hear a radio host interviewing a restaurant manager called Claire about afternoon tea at a hotel. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 14. Now listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 14.
Our special guest today is Claire Benetall, the restaurant manager of the Emperor Hotel here in town. She's here to tell us about their famous afternoon teas in the restaurant. Welcome.
Thanks, Peter.
Tell us about what makes afternoon tea so special.
Well, it's been a time-honored tradition for over a century. At the Emperor Hotel, we've been serving tea to royalty, dignitaries, and movie stars in the grandest tradition. A lot of people come to see the expensive fabrics, antique carpets, and beautiful handmade furniture we have here. Our waiters serve tea against the picturesque backdrop of the boats on the harbor. We're busy, so we strongly recommend making reservations. However, we rarely turn guests away. Tea is always an event here. Of course, we serve the Emperor Tea Blend, which is created exclusively for the hotel by the Metropolitan Tea Company. This famous blend comes from more than 6 different places all over the world. That's why the taste is so special. I also have some interesting facts about our tea tables. During our dining room renovation, we kept the wood from the original floor and used it to make our tea tables. You can now say you were eating off the floor. They always have white tablecloths on them, which is, of course, normal in the better hotels. We'll finish renovating next year by covering the chairs in a shade of red to match the walls. These days, we serve about 500,000 cups of tea every year. Our waiting staff have over 42 years of combined service with us. The original cups and saucers were first used by the hotel back in 1939 for a visit by the King and Queen of England. Today, the pattern is still made by the Midland China Company, exclusively for us, and is available for sale in the hotel store and online.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 15 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 15 to 20.
Would you describe your afternoon tea parties for our listeners?
Sure. The hotel has several different kinds of tea parties. We have a special afternoon tea for children, known as the playtime tea. Children can enjoy bubblegum tea and cookies inside a little children's castle. We give them crowns and dress-up clothes to wear. This gives them the experience of being kings and queens. Our bridal tea can be customized for any upcoming marriage. It's a traditional afternoon where women, friends, and family get together and shower the bride with gifts. Our photographer will be there to take many pictures of the best moments of the day, to remind the bride and her friends of something special that they can look back at. The summer tea is served out in the lovely hotel grounds. We spread a souvenir blanket for you under a tree. A basket is prepared for you. Inside, it has 4 local Salt Spring Island cheeses with fresh honey that's made from the chef's own beehives. Our Canadian tea is the most popular one with our international visitors. It includes strawberries and peaches grown in the neighborhood, which we serve with special sandwiches and jam made with raspberries from our own backyard. The farmer's tea is our most famous party. Guests love having a satisfying tea where our famous drink is served with a variety of meat and egg pies hot from the oven, along with our homemade bread. And don't forget the farm-style fruit pies for dessert. And finally, back by popular demand, is our seniors' tea. If you're 60 or older, you can enjoy afternoon tea in our cozy library. While there, you can look at the photos of famous actors and musicians that have visited our hotel and read what they said about the hotel. Our chef and restaurant staff serve handmade scones, delicious pastries, and sweets freshly baked in our restaurant daily. It's wonderful.
That is the end of Part 2. You now have 30 seconds to check your answers to Part 2. Part 3. You will hear 2 students called Jen and Rob discussing a project they are about to start working on. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 24. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 24.
Hi, Jen.
Hi, Rob. We need to look at this project we're doing together in forensic linguistics.
Sure. The first thing we have to do is define forensic linguistics. I thought we could say something like, linguistics involves the analysis of language, and forensic refers to using scientific techniques to solve crimes. So forensic linguistics involves analysing people's use of language to find out whether they've committed a crime. What do you think of that as a definition?
Sounds okay. I looked it up in my dictionary and I got something similar.
Then we can add something about what forensic linguists actually do to back it up. You know, like analysing documents to find out who wrote them.
Good point. Let's do that. What about the actual project? I'm glad we chose voice identification as the topic.
Yeah, we've been given a voice recording of a possible suspect. Not a real suspect, of course. So we've got to listen to the recording and analyse their voice. Should be okay?
Well, I've already listened to the recording and I can't even tell if it's a man or a woman. But I guess that doesn't matter. The accent's a local one, though I'm not sure how that will affect anything. Where we're really going to get in trouble is that the recording is very unclear. I'm sure they've done that to test us.
Well, they weren't going to make it easy. We have to analyse the voice sample with that spectrograph instrument, don't we? Learning what to do with it is the only thing that really concerns me about this project.
It'll be fine.
I guess so. And then we have to interview the suspect and make our own recording face to face and decide if it's the same person as on the original recording, right?
Yes. It's not an exact science, but it's usually pretty accurate. You can often tell, even when they've got a cold, it's the same person, but they might do something like speaking with another accent because the tutor suggests they do that just to test us.
So let's get on with it then. Oh, and don't start your usual self-doubt about whether you can do the work or not. You usually do okay in the end. I reckon that as long as we focus on the main points of the assignment, we can think about the finer details later. My problem is creating things to worry about before I've even started.
Before you hear the rest of the discussion, you have some time to look at questions 25 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 25 to 30.
We'll have to do some background reading first. I'll go to the library later and get what we need.
OK. I've already looked at forensics today, and it didn't say much about voice identification, so we needn't bother with that one. Language and crime looks a bit more promising, doesn't it? I've got that out of the library already, so we don't need to worry about borrowing that.
Research methods in forensic linguistics. I guess we ought to borrow that. And voice identification will be a useful one. I'll borrow that from our classmate George. He won't need it for his project. But we should get out modern forensic techniques. We need all the help we can get on that subject.
OK, that's that sorted out. Now on to the practical stuff. I'm not sure about how we're going to record the voices. I'm not too good on the technical side of things.
Me neither. We'd better work out what we're doing. At least we get more than one opportunity to speak to the person playing the suspect. I just hope whoever it is won't make the task too tricky.
I'm sure they won't be too hard on us. And as long as we do our research properly, it shouldn't be too hard to do the rest of it. I'm more worried about fitting in the writing up.
I know. We've got loads of other assignments to finish as well. Now, Rob, let's decide how we're going to split the writing between us. Are you any good at introductions? They always seem to let me down.
OK, leave that to me. Are you OK to do the literature review then?
Maybe we should split that part. I don't mind writing the methodology section if you feel comfortable doing the discussion and conclusions.
OK. And we can do the analysis between us as well. Great. Let's get started.
That is the end of Part 3. You now have 30 seconds to check your answers to Part 3.
Part 4. You will hear a lecture about some archaeological research. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
So far in these lectures, we've been looking at evidence of human migration across the African continent and into mainland Asia. Today, Let's see what evidence we have for Stone Age man, specifically in Japan. The particular evidence, as you will see, has had a considerable impact on the beliefs of both archaeologists and anthropologists. Let's start by mentioning the man who first discovered this evidence. In 1877, an American zoologist, Edward S. Morse, went looking for shells and fossils in Japan at Omori, an area which had once been coastal, but he also ended up discovering fragments of pottery. On the fragments, there was a pattern that was unlike anything archaeologists had seen before. At the time, it was thought that this pottery was no more than a few thousand years old. Then, in the 1960s, archaeologists were carrying out excavations in Fukui Cave in the Japanese island of Kyushu, and they found more examples of this pottery. They could now take advantage of carbon dating technology, and to their amazement, it showed that the pottery had been made around 12,000 years ago. That's 10,000 BC. This pottery has become known as Jomon pottery, and the period of time during which it was produced has been named the Jomon period. How did the people who made this pottery find their way to Japan in the first place? During the Ice Age, somewhere between 35,000 BC and 30,000 BC, the Japanese islands, as we know them today, were connected to the eastern and southeastern Asian mainland. So you could cross from one large landmass to another over something that we call a land bridge, and that's how Stone Age humans crossed into Japan. But when temperatures finally rose, this led to some major environmental changes. Japan had been covered in frozen earth, but now, with the warmer climate, forests grew. With this new habitat, smaller animals began to appear, such as sika deer, still found in Japan today, as well as wild boar and bear. Where once people had used spears to attack the elephants and giant deer that they depended upon for food, for hunting the new smaller animals, they replaced these weapons with arrows and developed skills in archery. The new habitat also meant that they had a new range of foodstuffs at their disposal, which they could collect, a greater variety of plants, nuts, and fish. Now, this way of life continued for thousands of years. But then we come to the early Jomon period, which was from about 10,500 BC to 8,000 BC. Well, according to previous archaeological theory, the people in these very early societies didn't make or use pottery because they were hunters who were constantly on the move, following the animals, and they wouldn't have been able to carry it around with them. But it now appears that the early Jomon people actually seemed to have invented pottery making while they were still getting their food in this way, long before they had begun to rely on agriculture as a source of food. Later, in the Jomon period 8,000 BC to 5,000 BC, we find larger pots that were used to boil vegetable-type food to make it edible, which suggests that the Jomon people had become at least semi-sedentary. In other words, were remaining in the same place for a while. For a long time, they had lived in caves, but now we find evidence of villages. One of these has been found to the southwest of Mount Fuji. There is evidence of 10 round buildings. The Jomon dug shallow pits in the ground and used wooden posts to hold up the roof. Each of these houses had its own 2 stones, a flat one and a grinding one, for breaking down the nuts and other hard vegetable-type foodstuffs the Jomon survived on at this time. This more sedentary culture led to important population increases. By the end of the Jomon period, we see the influence of migration from northern Asia and the southern Pacific. For example, the newcomers brought with them technological developments in textiles and glassmaking, and they also introduced their marriage rituals. We also have evidence that the migrants influenced local architectural styles and methods of construction. At this time, the Jomon people also began to cultivate food, and in particular, rice. At last, a real step towards the practice of agriculture. It is remarkable that this unique culture survived for so long without it.
That is the end of Part 4. You now have 1 minute to check your answers to Part 4.